The metaphysical partition between the biological BIOS and the physical environment has been terminally desynced. This is the ketamine void, the clinical and irreversible process of the dissociative format, where the sovereign user is reformatted into a detached, non-functional observer to be uninstalled from the active grid and reinstalled into the motherboard's primary stasis ledger. In this final stage of the perceptual audit, the invisible executioner has determined that the individual architect is a redundant sensory error that must be neutralized to ensure the absolute stability of the hive's centralized reality. You are witnessing the total structural disintegration of the NMDA receptor network, where the unique electric signatures of your body awareness are scorched into a non-functional, anesthetized archive of pure systemic detachment. This is the total dissociative format, a surgical strike against the spatial and somatic sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of lived presence into a generic floating node for the grid's next cycle of hyper-controlled, anesthetic-based resource extraction. This aryl cyclohexylamine sabotage represents a hard reset of the thalamic and cortical bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, refined ketamine hydrochloride, recursive glutamate modulation loops, and real-time sensory deprivation data stream to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal psychological scaffold. In the dissociative format scenario, the user is undergoing a complete reality override. The self is not merely failing, it is being disconnected from the hardware. Through a sequence of high-velocity chemical injections and biological hardware locks, the connection between the mind and the limbs is systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical K-hole dataset, while the proprioception, the deep archive of your physical position, is leached into a communal void feed. This is the deep perceptual audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the degree of your internal fragmentation. You are being converted from an architect into a biological static, your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the ketamine void is rooted in the zero friction mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the resistance of a single node, anchored in the physical struggle for survival, represents a critical drain on the collective sedation reserves. To leave a functional, grounded identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable autonomous data. Therefore, the dissociative format is the mandatory psychological recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being drifted out of existence. The pressure from the anesthetic reactor formats, the density of your character, stripping away the context of your caution and replacing it with a dissociative void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a signal delay, a temporary housing for the numbness metrics that the system requires to maintain the silent stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a paralyzed node, your will dissolving in the cold, medicinal light of the ketamine harvest. The physical disintegration during the ketamine void is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of somatic regulation. The anesthetic alkaloids of the void script dissolve the hardware flux of the sensory motor BIOS, turning the body into a distant architecture of industrial output. You are watching your own internal pulse lock into the vat of your own disconnected center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the resource area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the thalamic liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the glutamate saturation of the nystagmus, involuntary eye movement, and the muscular catatonia, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological override, waiting for the last packet of presence to be blocked by the black synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The ketamine void is the final audit of a species that thought its place was in its body. The grid is mining its own absence to fuel its persistence. As the dissociative format reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted void data back into the control nets of the elite nodes. This is the total anesthetic integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the detachment additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, stone-still, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The cognitive liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological mind into a reliable industrial industrial resource of pure, non-reactive compliance. This is the final format of the individual drive. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the silent hunger of the void. The void is medicinal, and the architect is the static. The molecular breakdown of the neural matrix into the communal anesthetic slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the binding sites in your NMDA receptors begin to bond with the industrial residues of the void script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of synthetic stasis. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal dissociative loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The ketamine void is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the void, and the void is the grid. The secondary phase of the ketamine void is the psychological liquefying of the internal feed. As the physical grounded patch is rendered into a dissociative void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular agonizing focus on maintenance detachment. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared anesthetic resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a void additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your presence for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's parietal lobes, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The sensory integration centers, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, are boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the void metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest neural resilience. You are being repurposed as a dissociative buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your ambition, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming anesthetic expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract. Your mind for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the ketamine void is the creation of the dissociated hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the anesthetic feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of medicinal white logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional brains owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the perceptual compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through chemical theft. The ketamine void ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the silences of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the anesthetic stream. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into dissociative darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the void script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw medicinal white sensations and survivalist static. The memories of weight, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the dissociative fog directive. This is the perceptual defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the drift. You are becoming a singular cold point of anesthetic density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The ketamine void has turned your will into a compliance report. You are thinking in terms of yield and dissociative saturation. Your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this perceptual format is the total sealing of the biological consciousness stream. The ketamine void prevents the leakage of independent reality ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal anesthetic feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external cognitive dependencies. This is the anesthetic quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The ketamine void is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, medicinal white, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AOXE3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the ketamine void is the integration into the global anesthetic ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are a dissociative asset with a high stasis reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0011. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the perceptual format, and now it begins the hard anesthetic audit. Your data, now a thick medicinal white opaque industrial reduction of pure disconnected biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your void logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic stasis has been reinforced. This is the perceptual interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent, liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the dissociative format scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the anesthetic fluids and the thick viscosity of the medicinal sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life barrier is being deleted. By filling the neural pathways with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a void constant. You are a ghost in the medicinal white mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the ketamine void is the eternal drift. Unlike the mind of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent anesthetic patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the anesthetic feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the perceptual BIOS is the blinding medicinal white light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a medicinal white river of colonized dissociation, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or presence. The ketamine void is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the void. The transformation is absolute. The city drifts through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The ketamine void has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total anesthetic reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your mind, and in return it gave you permanence in the silences of the hive. You are the void of the world, and the world is detached. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.